Hey everyone! So a while back, a friend of mine and I were discussing what happens if you combined AI generated images with VR. And yes, I know that just sounds like hot topic jargon, but I actually think it's quite an interesting thing to imagine. I did a test where I used 3D graphics and AI graphics side by side, using the same starting point and movement commands. As you can see, the 3D graphics shows a consistent and predictable space, while the AI graphics appear simply as a stream of images. With VR, we would be able to inhabit such a world, wherein one's surroundings are constantly changing. So I would like to look at this idea in a more philosophical lens, because I think it's quite a strange and near-future technology that is likely to become very influential. Before we get there, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with normal VR, and also to think about what VR represents philosophically. VR basically puts a little screen over each eye. These screens are controlling the movements of cameras inside a virtual space made up of points mapped in 3 dimensions. These cameras work by the same mathematical principles that was invented by the Renaissance painters 5 centuries ago, to create perspectival drawings, which means that they had a mathematical way of projecting 3D geometry onto a 2D plane, flattening 3D space in an accurate manner. Before this, artists had also depicted objects, but they did so in a way that we would consider inaccurate. They would, for instance, cut out sections of walls to show impossible views, or unwrap walls to show multiple sides of buildings at the same time, or have humans painted bigger than buildings. Crucially, you can see that there doesn't really seem to be a point of view, or at least not from a human point of view. In fact, one might say there is an omniscient point of view, namely that of God. So this obviously changed with the invention of perspective. Now, there is a very clear point of view, namely that of the human eye, actually the eye of an individual, in this case the artist. This invention coincided with the emergence of humanism and the beginning of the Enlightenment and what we now know as modernity. What happened in the Renaissance was that for the first time you had an accurate way of representing space, whether it be through perspective, but also of planimetric or elevations, which were important to architecture of course, but also maps. So instead of the symbolic maps from the medieval period, we now start seeing accurate representations of terrain, which has to do with property rights and the expansion of empire and colonialism and trade and so on. So all of these modern and kind of Western projects are bound up with a way of accurately depicting space, which we might call Cartesian space, named after the rationalist philosopher René Descartes. You might say that this abstracted way of understanding space is ultimately manifested in 3D graphics, and we can inhabit it in VR. Because here we literally have a space without any material. It's simply just points and vectors in 3D space. In the Bible, God says, "Let there be light," and the world was given form. But in 3D graphics, light rays are actually projected out of the camera, which is of course the human eye in VR, putting the human at the center and as the creator of the universe. But recently, the last 2 years or so, there has of course been a completely new way for computers to generate images, namely AI image generation. And as stated in the introduction, the AI tool has no conception of 3D space. Even though images might appear to have depth, like you see here, in fact there is no depth, at least in the Cartesian understanding of it. AI has simply learned some optical rules, or not even rules because that's too precise. It's learned some cues as to how to imply depth. So, it looked at all these images taken by cameras, etc., which obviously has this perspectival effect, and it sees that things in the distance are smaller and often obscured by haze, while things in the foreground are larger and sharper. So it has learned an intuition for how to convey depth, even though there is no real depth as we know from 3D graphics. And in this way, I'd say that AI images are more akin to pre-Renaissance images, where they started to have an intuition for how perspective works, even though they haven't found a mathematical way of doing it. So the images appear distorted. And in fact, if you look at early AI images in particular, they are very distorted a lot of the time, and often appear more like drawings by Escher that doesn't quite understand the geometry that is being depicted. So what I would like to suggest is that AI images break with the humanist tradition we have inherited from the Renaissance. The world no longer emerges out of the human eye, but from the billions of pixels of the machine. For in fact, that is how the AI was trained, on billions of images taken by billions of cameras from different views. We could compare it to a driverless cars with, let's say, 8 cameras pointing in different directions. Some looking down, some into the distance, maybe some even have infrared cameras or LiDAR scanners. So the driverless car therefore doesn't have a point of view. Instead, it takes all these images and makes a kind of model of the world by combining all of them. And I actually think that our human vision is increasingly diverting from the perspective as well. Obviously our eyes work the same way, but our spatial understanding is altered by technology. For instance, my understanding of my route through a city is supplemented by Google Maps. Or while navigating a video game such as Dota, Diablo or The Sims, I see the world in an isometric projection. In fact, when Diablo 2 came out, I played it for 17 hours straight. And when I finally went to bed, I remember dreaming isometrically. And I see this as a kind of proof that our brain is actually able to be quite drastically rewired in terms of how we understand space. But this obviously doesn't only apply to gamers. We often spend more than half of our day looking at screens where we're only seeing 2-dimensional menus and sliders. So in total, our sense of space and our place in it is altered, becoming a composite of different views, quite similar to the many-eyed machine. So if you think about it, combining AI and VR is essentially turning the constant stream of images from TikTok into an inhabitable space. I suspect we'll become used to it in no time. So that was all for now, and if you like this content, please partake in the mystical ritual that is liking and subscribing, as it helps getting the attention of the godlike algorithm of YouTube. So this arrangement of pixels will illuminate the world. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on the topic in the comment section. Do you feel that your human agency is fading with the adoption of new technology?